Hey everyone, Cable the Antique Book Collective, and today I'm getting to you guys with another part of my Identifying First Edition Books little playlist. So this part is going to be just geared towards reproductions, and not just reproductions, but reproductions that were made to look exactly like the very first editions, but they were made like 100 years later or later, namely the 1980s. So during the 1980s, they actually did a whole bunch of reprintings, very, very high quality ones, of various books, and they made them look almost identical to the very first editions. I have fallen for it a couple times. I bought a couple just because I think they look cool, and I actually have sold quite a few of them as well because there is a good demand for them. However, these books are seldom worth what the actual first editions of these books are. So I'm going to actually be showing you guys 3 books that I have here. One of them is an actual old book, and the other 2 are from the 1980s. So I'm going to have you guys guess which ones that is as I go through. But before I do that, I would just like to say, so the first editions for these books, like if you get a real first edition of some of these things, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. For me, I personally have had a first edition of The Time Machine that was worth over $30,000 when I had it. So I sold that one, obviously. Part of me wishes I didn't because I'm a science fiction nerd. I write science fiction, actually. But I'm a big science fiction guy. I love that. And the first edition of The Time Machine, it was one of the very first books that I read. I didn't, of course, read the first edition, but The Time Machine was one of the very first science fiction books I read, which really got me into all that. So it was really cool to get it. It was awesome to hold it in my hands, but I needed to sell it because it was the very beginning of my business, and I needed the money at the time. Now I could probably hang on to it because I have enough other sales, but when I was doing that, it was like my second month of business. And to date, it's still the coolest book that I've had. It's been the most profitable book I've had, but it's like, it means something to me because I'm a science fiction nerd and H.G. Wells is an absolute awesome author. So with all that said, though, the reason why I say that is because I actually do have an H.G. Wells book as one of my little exhibits. So I'm going to hold it up for you guys to see up close, just so you guys can look at it. So there's that, and it's got gilded pages. So gilded means it has like a little gold color. This one's, it's a little bit of a silvery gold, so I don't know, white gold you could call it. But that's that one. Here's our next book of the day. It's got this one, Moby Dick. So pretty popular book. Spine, the back, there's all that. There's actually it's a piece of paint. Got that off. So Moby Dick and Billy Budd. I have heard a little bit about Billy Budd, but I haven't actually heard that story. So I might even end up reading this one. And then this final one. So this one isn't leather, so it's not a great example to compare everything with. But here's this book. I'm going to hold this open for you guys to see a little bit of a color difference here. And I'm doing that because that's your hint. So as you might think, this one that I just showed you is the oldest book. This one's over 100 years old. I believe it's from the 1890s or something like that. Whereas these are both reproductions from the 1980s. So I'm going to just hold all 3 of these up for you guys. It's pretty hard to tell which one's which, just from looking at it. However, there are some definite things that you guys can notice differences with. So right off the bat, I'm going to show you guys the gilding. So you can see these two are, the gilding is a lot shinier, whereas this one is a very strong gold color, but it's not as shiny. It's not as much of a luster. These, in addition to that, these are more of a white gold color, while this one's more of a gold color. But that is something that you guys can look for, is the luster of the gilded pages. The older books will have a lot of dust on it and a lot of oxidation on it, which will sometimes, only sometimes, make your gilding look less shiny. In addition to that, you will see, let me just see if I got a good book example for this. It's not great, but something else you will see is that the spines, they will, on the older books, they will be pulled downwards a little bit because of the weight of the text block. I've mentioned this in other videos, so that's something else that you guys can use as a little bit of a hint. This isn't the best example for it, but when you have them on a shelf, you will see that the book on your right, I believe, it's sagging down more than this book here, the blue one, which is something else that you guys can go off of as you are looking at your books and seeing if they really are as old as you think they are. And this is all just stuff on the exterior. There is, of course, a much better way to do this, a more exact way to do this, but this is just stuff that you guys can think when you are scouting out books at your book sales or looking at pictures of them. It's a good way to be like, okay, is this a real first edition or is this a reproduction? So the next thing is, of course, the color of the book. So you can see the one in the center. That's the oldest one in this little lot here. it is a lot more faded. The yellowing of it happens because of the sun bleaching of it. In addition to that, there is the text. The text is a little harder to see because of that, whereas these other two on the outsides, the text is a lot easier to see, and it's because it's a much newer book. I mean, from the 1980s, like, that's 40-some years old. Like, it's not very old. So that's something else that you guys can go off of. Something else that you can see is some of these books, when you're dealing with old ones, they actually have a rough cut on them, on these pages. Sometimes it's on the top and bottom as well, so on this one it is on the bottom as well, where it's rough, and that's something that they used to do because it looks cool and it honestly makes it easier to like get to the right page sometimes, but we don't do that as often nowadays. It does happen sometimes, but not all the time. Something else that you can go off of is just looking at the book's cover, so I'm holding that up for you guys. You guys can see the little mark there, and then on the front side, it's not a perfect red finish all the way across. It does have some dings. It looks like it's losing its color, all that sort of stuff. And in addition to all that, as I showed you guys a little bit ago, you have the really faded color here on the spine and then the darker color for the cover, front cover and back cover. And the reason for that is because the spine was exposed to the sun and the elements, and the side covers, they were inside of a bookshelf not getting exposed to that. So that is why you'll have the color difference. Whereas with the reproductions, they're going to be basically the same exact color. So that's something else that you can go off of. One more thing that you can go off of is, so I'm opening this book and it's a little hard to open up, and that is called tight binding. It's when the binding is tight is when it's a little hard to open, and that's what you get with like a brand new book. It's going to be a little bit tight of binding, whereas old book, that thing will flop right on open. You'll probably have a few pages go, and it's something that it's been read several times. So those are all some things that you can go off of. So the next thing, I actually did not get a good book for this example, but this was the only one I had on hand. But the next thing, this is our very old book that we have in this little set. But you can, of course, look at the copyright page. They've had copyright pages for years and years, but not every single book has it in the really old versions of books. So for this one was late 1800s, early 1900s, and I've got my title page. Sorry, it's a little hard to get to since they didn't cut it. So title page right there, and then my next page, you normally would have the copyright page here, and there's no copyright page, and that's what they did with some old books, especially children's books is what I found, and I'll get into that in another video. But something that you can go off of for the age on this book, not saying it's a foolproof way, but something you can go off of is the writing. People would write the years that they got these books sometimes. They would write Merry Christmas sometimes. They'd write notes. They'd put their name. They'd put where they're from, all that sort of stuff. But they'd oftentimes put the year. And this one, the year says 1906. So that's when this person got these books. I actually have a set of them, and this set I think is worth like $1,500. I've been hanging on to it for videos, basically. But that particular set of books, they are very old. I'm not sure if they're first editions. I doubt they are, but of that set, they are. So there's that. But that is something that you can go off of for those older books. Is not always will they have the copyright page. It's not foolproof, anything but it is something that you guys can potentially look for. Honestly, the best thing to look for is actually having a book that has a copyright page, but it's not the end of the day if it doesn't have that. So with that said, on to one of these reproductions from 1980. I think this one, actually we'll see in a little bit, but here's our title page. And sometimes they will put the year right here. I'll talk about that in another video. But after the title page, the page after that, so like here's the title page, on the other side of it, you will have the copyright page. It'll be there like 99.9% of the time. Other times you will have to fish through it a little bit more, but that's where this one's copyright page. So it says, Moby Dick was first published in 1851. Billy Budd was first published in 1924. And then it says that this edition was published in 1984, so maybe not a good year to have your thing printed because of 1984, the book, but you know, so let me just show you guys. So you have here where the original ones were printed, and then you'll say later on what the other year that they printed this particular book was. When you are looking at copyright pages, you have to look at the most recent date, and I'm going to go through that in another video because there is some other things beyond that that you need to pay attention to, but that's it for this particular one. On to this H.G. Wells one. This one has a little bit more interesting information for this video, so let's just see. H.G. Wells, that's the title page. Oh, nope, sorry. This one's the title page. And on the other side, you have the copyright page. And this one has a few more dates, and it's because it has more stories in it. But as you can see, it has all the different dates, and then it has the year that this one was printed. So that's 1984, just like this one was. And something else that you guys probably noticed if you're book people, but might not have noticed if you're not a book person, is these books also had on the copyright page little ISBN numbers. So sometimes they'll put it, well, oftentimes, 90% of the time, they'll put it an ISBN number, on the copyright page. They might sometimes even have it printed on the back. So this one doesn't have anything, but this one says, let's see, bounded leather, and sometimes it'll put an ISBN back here. So that's some places that you'll find ISBN numbers. And with ISBN numbers, those books are automatically going to be newer books. Those are going to be reproduction books. If you are looking at something that you think might be really old and it has an ISBN, it's not really old. So ISBN numbers were rolled out in the 70s is when they basically became mandatory. I think they started doing them like in the late 60s. And before that, you had the Library of Congress numbers. Library of Congress numbers, I don't remember exactly when those started. I want to say in the 50s or maybe the 40s. But if you have anything with the Library of Congress number, that's probably not a first edition either, unless, of course, if it's a more recent book. But if we're talking something like H.G. Wells or Herman Melvin, who wrote Moby Dick, if we're looking at those things, then those are not going to be original ones if it has a Library of Congress number or a ISBN. So that's some things that you guys want to look for. Something else, I actually had someone comment on one of my videos with this, was they bought a book like this one that's a reproduction, and it had the some of the dust jacket left over, and on the dust jacket it had an ISBN number. That's something else. Something else that dust jackets often have that the actual cover of the book does not have is the dust jackets oftentimes have the actual ISBN code, the little barcode. They normally have that on the outside as well. That is another indication that you're not dealing with a really old antique book. So antique books, just a little bit of trivia. An antique book has to be at least 100 years old to be considered antique. It has to be at least 100 years old. To be considered vintage, it has to be at least 40 years old. That's commonly accepted numbers. That's what a lot of people use as the definition. So that's something that you guys can just use as a little bit of trivia. But all that said, those are some things that you guys really need to look out for. Not all the books that are like these from the 80s will be padded leather like these. These are padded leather, which I think is one of my favorites. I like how squishy it is. It's really nice to handle. Let me put it down. But I like the padded leather ones, even though they're reproductions. I actually have kept those two because I like them. They look cool, and as I said earlier, I do need to read a couple of those stories. And besides that, though, other things that you will have with those reproduction books is some of them will be just reproductions of more recent books, which makes it a little harder, but oftentimes they will have all the copyright information you need on the copyright page, like 99% of the time. Besides that, you guys will need to Google these things, look up the images of the actual first editions, and then look up these particular ones. These particular 1980s ones are made to look like the first editions, but they're not always the first editions, as I said. So you'll have to be really vigilant and diligent with that. I have personally, as I said, I've fallen for it a couple times. I've almost fallen for it like 100 times, and I've actually been stuck with a couple bums. And in fact, I will be doing an entire video on getting stuck on one of the bums that's not one of the 1980s ones in another one. So I actually have a book set aside for that one, because this book, I paid $25 for it, and it might be worth $25. Like, I'm trying to sell it for 30 something because I want to get it gone and get some money back, but I don't know if I'll ever end up selling it. So with all that said, back to the versions of these books. So you will get ones that look like the first editions. You'll get ones with padded leather. You'll get ones that look old. You'll get ones with gilded pages. All these things that look really old. And you also get even ones with little slipcases or boxes, whatever you want to call them. And those are actually the ones that I've fallen for the most. Like, I'm like, oh, look at this. It looks like the real one. It even has the fading. It has this and this and this. And I grab it and I'm like, oh, poo, it's not a real one. So that's something else, though. There are so many different ways that they redid it in the 1980s. None of this was outright piracy. Don't worry, guys. You're not buying a pirated book, but they are reproductions. There are various reasons and ways that people did reproductions. Honestly, I think reproductions are some of the coolest things out there because it brings back a book that might otherwise be lost. I mean, let's just think of so many of the books that we grew up with, like A Tale of Two Cities, of course, Time Machine. You have all the other H.G. Wells books, the Jules Verne's books, even like Frankenstein. All these books are like older than dirt, but they keep on getting reprinted because not only are they popular, but they're really important to history and all the sort of stories that you hear and think about all the time, like Grimm's fairy tales, Pilgrim's Progress. Like, all these ones are like older than dirt, but people keep printing them because they need to stay around, and that's why I like reproductions. They do trick me every now and then. but they are really important and they do benefit society, I think. So with all that said and done, guys, be sure to subscribe. Be sure to check out the playlist, which should be right there. And I'll see you guys in the next video.